St. John Bosco's first dream. When I was 9 years old, I had a dream that stayed with me for the rest of my life. I dreamt I was near my home in a large field filled with children. Some were playing, laughing, and having fun, but others were shouting and cursing. Shocked by their behavior, I jumped into their midst, trying to stop them by swinging at them and yelling. At that moment, a man appeared, dressed in bright, noble clothing. His face shone so brightly that I couldn't look directly at him. He called me by name and told me to lead the children. He added, "You must win them over not with blows, but with kindness and love. Show them that sin is ugly and virtue is beautiful." I was confused and protested, saying, "But I'm just a child. How can I teach them about such things?" The shouting and chaos stopped, and the children gathered around the man. He replied, "What seems impossible now will become possible with obedience and learning. I will give you a teacher who will guide you." I asked, "Who are you?" He answered, "I am the son of the woman your mother taught you to honor 3 times a day." Suddenly, a majestic lady appeared beside him, wearing a cloak that sparkled like stars. She saw my confusion and took my hand, saying, "Look." I saw the children transform into wild animals, wolves, goats, bears, and others. Then, as I watched, the animals changed into lambs. The lady said, "This is your field. Here is where you must work. Be humble, strong, and steadfast. In time, you will understand everything." I began to cry, asking for more explanation, but she gently placed her hand on my head and said, "In due time, all will be made clear." At that moment, a noise woke me. I was completely puzzled, unable to sleep the rest of the night. When I told my family about the dream, my brother Joseph joked that I would become a shepherd, while my mother wondered if I might become a priest. My grandmother, however, dismissed it, saying, "You shouldn't pay attention to dreams." Even though I tried to forget it, the dream stayed with me, and over the years, its meaning became clearer. Later, in 1858, when I shared this dream with Pope Pius IX, he told me to write it down for the encouragement of others. Interpretation. St. John Bosco's first dream reveals a profound spiritual calling, pointing to his future mission as a shepherd of troubled youth. The man radiating light is Christ, who identifies himself as the son of the woman your mother taught you to honor, referencing the devotion of the Angelus and the Blessed Virgin Mary. Christ calls Don Bosco to lead young people to virtue through kindness and love, not force, reflecting the Christian mission of evangelization through charity. This foreshadows Don Bosco's life work of transforming the lives of young people, emphasizing their moral and spiritual growth rather than mere discipline. The appearance of Mary as a majestic lady underscores her role as an intercessor and guide in Don Bosco's mission. Catholic theology often portrays Mary as the one who nurtures and directs individuals to fulfill God's will. Her assurance, "In due time everything will be clear," highlights the importance of trust in divine timing. The dream places Mary in her traditional role as the mother and teacher of all Christians, reminding Don Bosco to rely on her guidance as he embarks on his journey. The transformation of wild animals into lambs symbolizes the power of grace to renew and redeem. The unruly animals represent humanity's sinful tendencies, particularly the disorder found among neglected youth. Their conversion into lambs reflects the Church's belief in the transformative power of God's mercy and grace. Don Bosco's mission would center on bringing wayward youth back to Christ, mirroring the parable of the Good Shepherd who seeks the lost sheep. The dream also emphasizes the virtues of obedience and learning, foundational elements of Catholic life. Christ's instruction to Don Bosco to be obedient and acquire knowledge reflects the Church's belief in humility and formation as key to fulfilling God's will. This advice directly connects to Don Bosco's later work in education and catechesis, where he would prioritize both spiritual and intellectual development for the young people under his care. These elements are shown as essential tools for overcoming spiritual battles, represented in the dream by the chaos of sin. Finally, the dream highlights the role of patience and trust in God's providence. Don Bosco is asked to begin his work in the field without fully understanding its purpose, relying instead on divine guidance. This reflects a fundamental Catholic principle, that God's plans often unfold gradually and require faith to endure trials. Mary's instruction to make yourself humble, steadfast, and strong further emphasizes the need for perseverance and virtue in navigating life's challenges. Together, the dream's elements serve as a prophetic blueprint for Don Bosco's ministry, demonstrating the central role of faith, grace, and Mary's maternal guidance in achieving God's work. St. John Bosco's second dream, the dream of the shepherdess in 1844, during a time of uncertainty and challenges in my work with the oratory. I had a dream that seemed to build on the one I had as a boy. In the dream, I found myself surrounded by a chaotic mixture of animals, wolves, goats, lambs, rams, dogs, and birds, all making a deafening noise. The scene was so overwhelming that I wanted to run away. Just then, a woman appeared, dressed as a shepherdess. She called me to follow her and lead the strange flock she was guiding. Together, we began a long journey, stopping 3 times along the way. At each stop, many of the wild animals transformed into gentle lambs, and their numbers steadily grew. Finally, we reached a large meadow where the lambs grazed peacefully, no longer attacking one another. Exhausted, I wanted to rest, but the shepherdess urged me to keep going. After a short distance, we arrived at a spacious playground surrounded by covered walkways, with a church at one end. By this time, most of the animals had turned into lambs, and their numbers had become immense. I saw young shepherds appear to tend the flock, but they stayed only briefly before leaving. Then, something extraordinary happened. Many of the lambs themselves transformed into shepherds, taking care of the flock. As more shepherds arrived, they eventually spread out, bringing new animals into the fold. I was eager to leave, thinking it was time for Mass, but the shepherdess asked me to look southward. There I saw a vast field planted with vegetables, corn, potatoes, cabbage, and more. When she asked me to look again, I saw a magnificent church rise in its place. Inside the church, musicians and singers seemed to be inviting me to celebrate Mass. Above the church's doors, a large banner displayed the words, Hic domus meae, inde gloria mea. Here is my house, from here my glory will shine. Confused by what I had seen, I asked the shepherdess where we were and what everything meant. She replied, In time you will understand it all when you see it with your own eyes. Thinking I was awake, I said, I already see clearly and understand. But at that moment, the bell of the Church of St. Francis of Assisi rang for the Ave Maria, and I woke up. Although I initially dismissed the dream as mere imagination, its meaning gradually became clear as my work progressed. The journey and the stops symbolized the challenges and relocations the oratory would face before finding a permanent home. The lambs transforming into shepherds represented the young men who would join me in caring for the youth. The church and the surrounding structures foreshadowed the mission God had prepared for me. It was a vision of hope and reassurance during a time of doubt, showing me that Our Lady was guiding my path and ensuring the success of the mission entrusted to me. Interpretation. St. John Bosco's second dream, often called the Dream of the Shepherdess, offers a powerful prophetic vision of his mission as a spiritual leader and educator. From a Catholic perspective, it reveals the trials, transformations, and ultimate triumph of his work with the oratory. The chaotic mixture of wild animals symbolizes the sinful and unformed nature of humanity, particularly the youth Don Bosco sought to serve. Their noise and disorder represent the challenges he faced in guiding them toward virtue. The shepherdess, clearly the Blessed Virgin Mary, invites him to take responsibility for these souls, demonstrating her role as a motherly guide in his apostolic mission. The journey and the repeated stops reflect the gradual and often difficult process of spiritual transformation. At each stop, wild animals become gentle lambs, signifying the power of grace to convert sinners and bring peace to their souls. This echoes Catholic teachings on the necessity of patience, perseverance, and divine intervention in leading others to Christ. The increasing number of lambs mirrors the growth of Don Bosco's mission, as more youth are transformed by his efforts and the grace of God. The arrival at the playground and the church is particularly significant. The playground, surrounded by walkways and centered around the church, represents the holistic vision of Don Bosco's oratory, a place where education, recreation, and spiritual nourishment coexist. The church, with its inscription Hic domus me, inde gloria me, "Here is my house, from here my glory will shine," symbolizes the centrality of the faith in Don Bosco's mission. This aligns with the Catholic understanding that the Church is the source of grace and the center of all evangelization efforts. The transformation of lambs into shepherds highlights the vocational aspect of Don Bosco's work. Many of the youth he guided would go on to become priests, educators, and religious, continuing his mission of service. This underscores the Church's teaching on the universal call to holiness and the importance of forming new leaders to spread the gospel. The departing shepherds who return with more animals reflect the apostolic nature of Don Bosco's mission, with his influence extending far beyond the oratory. Finally, the dream reassures Don Bosco of Our Lady's guidance and protection. The shepherdess encourages him to persevere despite uncertainty, promising that all will become clear in time. This reflects a Catholic understanding of trusting in divine providence and the maternal care of Mary. The dream, ultimately, is a message of hope and direction, confirming that Don Bosco's mission is divinely inspired and sustained by grace. It serves as a reminder of the transformative power of faith, the guidance of the Blessed Virgin, and the importance of unwavering trust in God's plan. St. John Bosco's third dream. The dream of the future oratory in 1846, during a period of great uncertainty and difficulty in securing a permanent place for the oratory. I had another dream that brought clarity and hope. In the dream, I found myself in a vast meadow filled with boys. These boys were fighting, stealing, swearing, and engaging in other bad behavior. The air was filled with shouting, and stones flew through the air as they hurled them at each other. It was chaos. Feeling overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, I hesitated. Suddenly a woman appeared beside me. Her presence was calming, and she told me, "Go among those boys and work." I hesitated again, thinking, how can I help them? I don't even have a place to gather them. I turned to people nearby, hoping they might help, but they ignored me. Frustrated, I looked back at the woman, and she said, "Here is a place," pointing to a meadow. I protested, "But it's just a field." She replied, "My son and his apostles didn't even have a place to lay their heads." Encouraged by her words, I began speaking to the boys, teaching, confessing, and preaching. Yet I felt my efforts were in vain because I didn't have a building to bring them together. The woman then led me a little farther north, where I saw a small church with a low roof and a small courtyard. A large group of boys was gathered there. I resumed my work, but as the group grew, the space became too small. Turning back to the woman, I pleaded for help. She pointed to another location, where I saw a much larger church and an adjoining house. Then she led me farther still, to a tilled field near the facade of the new church. "This," she said, "is the place where the glorious martyrs Adventor and Octavius shed their blood. On this sacred ground, I want God to be honored in a special way." The woman pointed to a specific spot and said, "This is where they fell." I wanted to leave a marker to remember the place, but I couldn't find anything to use. Still, I kept the location firmly in my mind. As I continued to look, I noticed the number of boys increasing. More and more boys gathered, and I saw priests and clerics arriving to help me. Yet after a while, these helpers left. Feeling abandoned, I turned to the woman again. She handed me a white ribbon with the word obedience written on it and told me to bind it around the foreheads of the helpers. I did so, and to my amazement, they all stayed and continued to assist me. Finally, I saw a grand church rise on the very spot the woman had shown me. Around it were many buildings, and in the center stood a magnificent monument. The woman assured me that all my work would bear fruit, but I would face many obstacles along the way. She said, "Keep faith in God and rely on the protection of His mother." At that moment, the dream ended. Interpretation. St. John Bosco's third dream, the dream of the future oratory, offers a profound vision of his mission's growth and the spiritual challenges he would face. The meadow filled with unruly boys represents the state of the youth he was called to serve, abandoned, lacking guidance, and deeply in need of moral and spiritual formation. Their chaotic behavior symbolizes the effects of sin and neglect, highlighting the urgency of Don Bosco's work. The Blessed Virgin Mary's appearance as his guide underscores her central role as a protector and advocate, offering both reassurance and direction for his mission. The barren field that Mary identifies as the starting point of Don Bosco's work reflects the Church's teaching on beginnings rooted in humility. Like Christ and his apostles, who often labored without material security, Don Bosco is called to rely on God's providence rather than human resources. This aligns with Catholic spirituality, which emphasizes trusting God to bring growth where human means fall short. The transformation of the field into a thriving space for education and worship demonstrates the fruitfulness of cooperating with God's grace and the importance of persistence in one's vocation. The recurring theme of the boys' increasing numbers reflects the expansive nature of God's work when nurtured by faith. The small church and courtyard growing into a larger church symbolize the development of Don Bosco's mission, eventually leading to the creation of the Salesian congregation and its global reach. The presence of priests and clerics, who first assist and then leave, highlights the challenges of maintaining collaborators in apostolic work. The white ribbon-marked obedience reminds us that faithfulness to God and commitment to one's mission are key to sustaining unity and perseverance. The field of martyrs ties Don Bosco's mission to the Church's tradition of sanctification through sacrifice. The blood of Adventor and Octavius, sanctifying the ground, serves as a reminder that fruitful ministry often requires personal suffering and steadfast faith. The vision of a grand church rising on this site symbolizes the triumph of God's glory over trials. The church, surrounded by buildings and centered on a monument, reflects the spiritual and educational mission of Don Bosco's oratory, forming young people in both faith and life skills while anchoring them in the Eucharist and devotion to Mary. Ultimately, this dream reassures Don Bosco that his work is divinely ordained and protected by Our Lady. Her promise of challenges and triumphs highlights the Catholic understanding of redemptive suffering, that trials, when endured with faith, lead to spiritual growth and ultimate success. The dream serves as both a roadmap and a reminder of the divine guidance sustaining his mission, encouraging trust in God's providence and Mary's maternal care. It reinforces the Catholic truth that obedience, humility, and perseverance are the foundation of all apostolic work. St. John Bosco's fourth dream, the dream of the future church. In a time when I was struggling with the oratory's temporary locations, uncertain about where we could settle, I had another vivid dream. I saw myself in a vast field filled with young boys. They were fighting, stealing, and shouting, throwing stones at each other, and behaving without restraint. It was complete chaos. I was about to turn away, overwhelmed, when the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared by my side. Calmly and confidently, she said, "Go among them and work." Though I wanted to help, I was at a loss because I had no place to gather the boys. Turning to Mary, I expressed my frustration, but she simply gestured toward an open meadow and said, "This is the place." I hesitated, seeing only an empty field, but she reminded me, "My son and his apostles didn't even have a place to lay their heads." Inspired by her words, I began working with the boys where I was. I preached, taught, and heard confessions, but the lack of resources and space made the work difficult and seemed to yield little fruit. Mary then took me to another spot nearby. There, I saw a small church with a low roof and a courtyard filled with boys. This place seemed more suitable, so I began working there. However, as the number of boys increased, the space became too small again. I turned to Mary, and she pointed to another, much larger church with an adjacent house. She led me to a nearby field, saying, "On this ground, where the martyrs Adventor and Octavius shed their blood, I desire God to be honored in a special way." She showed me the exact spot where they had died, and I kept it firmly in my mind. As I continued to observe, I saw an enormous church rise from the ground, with a beautiful monument standing in its center. Around the church were many large buildings. Mary assured me that all the obstacles in my path would be overcome if I remained faithful and trusted in her help. She also warned me of challenges ahead, saying that many would begin helping me but later abandon the work. To this, she handed me a ribbon with the word obedience written on it. She instructed me to use it to bind the foreheads of my helpers. When I did, they stayed and worked alongside me. At the conclusion of the dream, I saw the grand church completed, filled with boys, clerics, and priests. The work was thriving, and the place seemed alive with joy and grace. Mary's words echoed in my mind. This is my house, and from here my glory will shine. At that moment I woke up. Interpretation. The fourth dream, the dream of the future church, offers a rich and prophetic vision of St. John Bosco's work and its ultimate flourishing. From a Catholic perspective, it underscores the divine providence guiding his mission, the central role of trust in Mary, and the transformative power of obedience and perseverance. The chaotic scene of unruly boys represents the lost and abandoned youth of Don Bosco's time, who were spiritually and morally adrift. Their behavior highlights the urgent need for evangelization and the restoration of virtue in the lives of the young. Mary's appearance as the guide reflects her essential role in the mission of the Church and her personal involvement in Don Bosco's work. Her assurance that this is the place emphasizes the Catholic teaching that God often works through humble and seemingly insignificant beginnings. The empty meadow symbolizes the starting point of Don Bosco's oratory, a barren field, unprepared yet brimming with potential. Mary's reminder of Christ and his apostles having no place to rest underscores the call to detach from material concerns and trust in God's providence. The progression from a small, modest church to a grand and thriving one illustrates the gradual growth of Don Bosco's mission. It reflects the Catholic principle that fidelity to God's plan and reliance on grace yield abundant spiritual fruit over time. The larger church represents the culmination of Don Bosco's work, becoming a center for faith, education, and community. Its grandeur highlights the glory of God shining through the efforts of those who labor for him. The ribbon of obedience emphasizes the unity and commitment necessary for apostolic work to thrive. In Catholic spirituality, obedience to God and one's vocation is essential for overcoming challenges and ensuring the perseverance of collaborators. Mary's instruction to bind the helpers' foreheads with a ribbon reflects the need for spiritual discipline and alignment with God's will. Without this virtue, even the most inspired work risks faltering. Ultimately, the dream reassures Don Bosco that his mission is divinely guided and protected by Our Lady. The vision of the grand church, bustling with life and activity, symbolizes the fulfillment of God's promise to glorify himself through the oratory. Mary's parting words, "This is my house, and from here my glory will shine," affirm the Catholic teaching of her maternal role in the Church's mission. The dream challenges us to trust in divine providence, embrace humility, and persevere in our calling, knowing that God's grace, working through Mary, will bring his plans to fruition. St. John Bosco